And so I'm really happy to introduce you to someone I know, David Perrecker. He's a student at the University of Oregon in the Department of Sociology PhD program. David is somebody I've worked with for a few years now as an advisor and have seen his brilliance as a scholar, his brilliance as a tactician and strategist, an organizer, and his role in working with YDSA here and DSA nationally has been so impressive to me. I've learned so much as a colleague working close to him and reading his work. And I'm just honored to ask him to come to the stage because, you know, he's going to introduce Professor Abdelhadi here in a moment. But I want to say he's the one who had the idea of inviting her to campus here and touch base with me, and we move forward with this. And so it's only appropriate that he makes this introduction. So with no further ado, I want to welcome David Perrecker to please come up here and share your invitation and welcome of Eman. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Michael, for those kind words. Thank you again to our sponsors and the Global Justice Program for making this event possible. And thank you again to all the students in this room and many who are not in this room whose activism and courage over the last year made this event possible. It's my pleasure this evening to introduce Dr. Eman Abdelhadi, a sociologist at the University of Chicago. Dr. Abdelhadi is a scholar of gender and religion. She has a book coming out soon called Impossible Futures: Why Women Leave Muslim American Communities. They are also the co-author of Everything for Everyone, an oral history of the New York Commune 2052 to 2072. They're also an organizer in the labor and, of course, the Palestine Solidarity Movement, and a columnist for In These Times magazine. I first met Eman last August in Montreal at a small conference of critical sociologists on the margins of the annual ASA conference, the American Sociological Association. Eman was there to present about an organizing effort that she was involved in, called Sociologists for Palestine, and passed out buttons and educated us about this. Sociologists for Palestine is a really exciting and important effort within the profession of sociology to raise awareness and actually get the ASA Council to pass a resolution calling for a ceasefire, calling for divestment from corporations that benefit from the genocide in Palestine. It was passed successfully through the ASA, and I think it's a really important example of how we can connect our professional contexts, also our working context, our labor unions, with these vital international issues. And I think Eman will be speaking somewhat about Sociologists for Palestine this evening. When I saw them talk, I knew immediately that I wanted to have them come to Eugene and speak to all of us and share their knowledge and experiences. I picked up Eman from the airport yesterday evening, and in the car we were chatting, of course, about all that we've been doing here, all the activities and achievements of our coalition over the last year. I also talked about our campus labor movement and the remarkable success of the UO Student Workers Union that many of us have also been involved in. After describing all these things, Eman remarked to me, I worry that there won't be anything that I can tell you that you don't already know, that you haven't already learned through struggle. And I take that as a great compliment. We should take that as a great compliment from a veteran organizer in the dynamic social movement city of Chicago at a very important world-class university like the University of Chicago, that Eman would think, oh, do I have something to contribute, some form of political knowledge that we can learn from? But of course we do have things to learn from Eman. And the more important point is that we are always needing to learn from social movements all around the world. We are part of something much larger than ourselves. It is unfortunately very easy to fall into a kind of parochialism and a localism. We can sometimes forget that the struggle is larger than Eugene or larger than the University of Oregon. But of course we stand on the shoulders of many before us activists and movements from around the world, including student movements. If you go to Wikipedia and search the phrase student intifada, I like to tell this story, the Wikipedia article for the 2024 pro-Palestine solidarity encampments from around the world, you will see in the pictures, in the thumbnail image, is a picture of our encampments from the May Day protest at its peak. It looks beautiful. And it's alongside images from Columbia University, but also universities from Amsterdam, universities in Australia. And we know that universities around the country, in Brazil, in parts of Africa, parts of Asia, also engaged in these struggles. We must not forget, even for a second, that we are part of something much, much larger. And that gives us power, because so many students around the world have gone through things that we're going through, but have found successful ways through them to build power. So we have a responsibility to learn from them constantly. However, we should also be aware that we have something to contribute to the movements too. I'm thinking specifically here of the University of Oregon Student Workers Union, which is, to my knowledge, the only undergraduate student worker union wall-to-wall at a public institution. There's a few others in the United States, but it was a breakthrough for the student movement, not only in this country, but worldwide. No one else has ever really done this around the world. People need to know. We have to tell them that this is another way that we can build power, that we can challenge our universities, challenge our institutions to live up to their ideals. So as we listen to Eman's talk this evening, let's think about what is our responsibility and how can we learn from each other, nationally, internationally, and how can we share our experiences, share our accumulated knowledge to build our movements into something that can ultimately win power and end genocide, end war, and make a just world for all of us. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for that generous introduction and for having me here. I really can't emphasize enough how energizing it's been to just spend this day with you. It's just been incredible to learn from all of you, from student organizers, to attend your rally. It's really just such an honor to be here. And, you know, speaking of this conversation we had last night, I think that as movements, we create collective knowledge. And I see myself as a movement intellectual as someone who is a vessel or mouthpiece for that knowledge. So everything I say here tonight is not, you know, it's not like if tomorrow I'm giving a talk on my book project. And in that case, I'm going to try to say really original things and present you with new data and such. But tonight, what I'm doing is like giving the movement back some of the collective work and synthesizing some of what we've been on a national and global level coming up with together. So this is a collective endeavor and not, anything good I say is from the movement effectively, and any mistakes are my own. So thank you for being here with me. And I want to really thank Michael Dreiling and David for initiating my visit, and to the staff of the Global Justice Program, Global Studies, Women and Gender Studies, Anthropology, Sociology, and Religious Studies departments. And especially to the students who made this possible. I really was so touched almost to tears to learn that this was a result of your organizing. It really makes it so special. I'm just so honored. And very special thanks to anyone who deserves to be on that list of gratitude that I don't know about or have forgotten. So I want to start tonight with a story. In the 1930s, administrators at Columbia University were following the lead of much of this country's liberal elite and forming ties with none other than the Third Reich. The Nazi regime was holding a major propaganda festival in Germany in 1936 to celebrate the 550th anniversary of Heidelberg University. Columbia University President Nicholas Murray Butler sent a delegate and friendly greetings to the gathering. Murray was not alone. Harvard and Yale also sent faculty delegates to the celebration in Nazi Germany. Students revolted. At Columbia, a student named Robert Burke led massive demonstrations to protest this decision, as well as the choice to invite Nazi officials to speak at Columbia's campus. You can see on the screen coverage of this protest. The university accused him of creating a disturbance. I'm sure that accusation is familiar to many people in this room. Burke was expelled and his promising career was destroyed. Columbia never apologized. The 30s were not the first time that university administrators were on the wrong side of history, and it would not be the last. They cracked down on pro-labor protests, on pro-civil rights protests, on anti-Vietnam War protests, and on protests of apartheid South Africa. Today, history repeats itself as both tragedy and farce. For 16 months now, we've seen universities exact the most brutal version of the Palestine exception to free speech. Students and faculty built beautiful solidarity encampments across the country and across the world. Universities sent in the police to drag their bodies across campus, crack their skulls, and beat them into submission. We are also experiencing a wave of repression that would have made McCarthy blush. One pro-Palestine tenured professor at Indiana University was suspended last year, and the formal charge was over a room booking error. Maura Finkelstein, a Jewish anti-Zionist professor with tenure, was recently fired from her job at a liberal arts college. Stephen Thrasher, a tenure-track professor at Northwestern University, who ironically holds the Daniel H. Renberg Chair of Social Justice in Reporting, was suspended and subjected to an investigation for his writing on the social injustice of the genocide in Gaza. The faculty peers on his investigation committee found in his favor, so the university simply launched a new investigation. In December, New York University arrested multiple faculty members at a campus protest, and then declared them persona non grata, barring them from their workplaces. Some of them have been at NYU for decades. Students have fared even worse than faculty. Countless have been suspended, had degrees withheld, or been made to sit through interminable disciplinary procedures. At my own institution, the University of Chicago, under the watchful eye of so-called institutional neutrality, or the Chicago Principles, students have been arrested for nonviolent protests and served with disciplinary hearings. Adjunct faculty have been called in by supervisors to discuss mentions of Palestine in their classrooms. Most recently, 2 students were arrested, placed on involuntary leave, and evicted for attending a protest 2 months earlier. Democrats were swift to condemn universities for allowing students, faculty, or staff to express any solidarity with Palestine and any critique of Israel. In shameful congressional hearings in December of 2023, Democrats joined Republicans in interrogating university presidents for supposedly letting anti-Semitism run rampant. Those same presidents were actively and ruthlessly shutting down student protest. At the sham hearings, they failed to question the false equivalence between criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism. But even this kowtowing did not save their jobs. Of the 7 university presidents that testified, 5 have lost their positions. Now, with Trump at the helm, the state's attacks on pro-Palestine protesters are continuing and intensifying. Attacks to which Democrats and liberal college administrators paved the way. Trump has promised to deport international students who advocate for Palestine and has warned university administrators to comply. Though the Trump administration recently ended federal investigation into racial or ethnic discrimination in the workplace, it has just launched investigations into anti-Semitism and so-called anti-Israel bias at 5 universities. Of course, these investigations are not at all concerned with the well-being of anti-Zionist Jewish students who have been harassed and disciplined. They are only concerned with quelling pro-Palestinian protests. How do we make sense of the sheer depth and breadth of the Palestine crackdown at universities? And where do we go from here? The developments I just described are inseparable from a broader crisis in academia. The university has become a corporation. Elite universities function as hedge funds and tax havens for billionaires and playgrounds for their children. Universities that cater to less advantaged students are increasingly squeezed for funds. The quality of education is decreasing while the cost is increasing. Students are expected to borrow from their future earnings at exorbitant interest rates. Meanwhile, the job market is not improving, and those costly degrees are giving smaller and smaller returns. Rising tuitions have not been invested in quality education. Tenure-stream faculty positions, programs in the humanities and social sciences are being squeezed, while administrator salaries skyrocket and building projects bloom. Faculty are weaker than ever before and are facing increasing austerity. Donor influence on education, on disciplinary policy, and on university programming and priorities is higher than ever before. Just last week, The Intercept reported the enormous influence of a single rich Zionist parent on NYU's targeting of students. In May 2024, The Washington Post reported that a group of Zionist billionaires had pushed Mayor Eric Adams to sic the NYPD on protesting students across the city, which he happily did. Meanwhile, the extreme right is blaming university faculty and curricula for their losses in the so-called culture wars. 1 in 5 young people identify as something other than straight, and the right would like you to believe that gender and sexuality studies departments are to blame. If only, right? If only I had that much influence on my students, truly. I'm like, really? Okay. In Florida, a Trump supporter decried a textbook for simply stating the fact that a land named Palestine existed before Israel was created. Now, lawmakers are scouring hundreds of textbooks to purge them of so-called anti-Israel bias. The examples are too long and too exhausting to list here. The problem is, instead of protecting academics or academia, administrators are rushing to comply, handing their workers and curricula to the right on a platter. If the crisis over Palestine reflects the state of the university reflects the broader crisis in American society, where the unchecked power of the ruling elite grows day by day at the expense of everyone else and at the expense of the institutions that have been key to the functioning of this society. So what next? Those of us who believe in the power and promise of the university, and I count myself among them, have two options. The first is to erect an image of a glorious past situates, one where the American Academy was once a place for equality and justice, for freedom of academic thought, of expression, and of speech. We can project onto the past a corrective of American academia that defines it by its best tendencies and ignores its worst impulses. It's tempting. Nostalgia is a really powerful tool. But I will argue that this sets us up for a losing battle. It's the same framework of liberal nostalgia that lost an election in November, handing this country into an even more uncertain and even more terrifying future than we were already facing. Academia's past has not been glorious, just as America's past has not been glorious, just as the so-called liberal world order has not been glorious. All three have been built on the blood and sweat of those deemed disposable by racial capitalism. All three have reflected, above all else, the interests of power. What is the ivory tower without the native land on which it was built? Without the enslaved people who built it? Without the underpaid brown and black workers who still maintain it? What would our universities be without the communities our predecessors and colleagues have experimented on, theorized, then discarded? If you walk just 3 minutes east of my office at the University of Chicago, you can hang out in Milton Friedman Hall and celebrate a man who made it his business to advise military juntas as they slaughtered, disappeared, and subjugated their populations from Latin America to East Asia. You may be thinking, this is a selective and unfair characterization of the American Academy. Some of you are shaking your head, I see you, comrade. You may chide me for omitting the many advances to society made within these halls, the awesome tomes of knowledge and progress, and even the radiating political dissonance that has at times spread from academia to society. You're right, but those achievements don't reflect the core impulses of academia. They've happened despite it. They reflect the creativity and struggle of people who take the cracks of these institutions of power and plant seeds within them. Academic freedom, freedom of speech, and all the rest of what we prize about academia have often solidified in the context of intensive struggle. How many times, to give a quick example, have we seen universities memorialize the very protesters their predecessors had criminalized and brutalized? How many departments and disciplines were born of intensive student and faculty activism? If we accept that the best things that happen at universities often emerge from the margins, not the core, this brings me to the second framework before us. Instead of nostalgia for a past version of the university that never existed, let us embrace the contradictions of this establishment. The university is a liberal elite institution of power and therefore exhibits all the same contradictions and oppressions of the temporal and spatial context in which it is embedded. It's not a special citadel of freedom. It's rather another institution in a society with a fundamental ambivalence towards freedom and a suspicion of those who seek it. Like most other institutions, the university has the potential to either be liberatory or oppressive. The first framework of nostalgia would have us chasing after an ever-shifting ideological edifice that university administrators have never been faithful to. It would have us chasing the doublespeak. Here we are told the core values are freedom of expression, but then our students are arrested for protesting. We're told the university is politically neutral, but even the most cursory search shows the deep material ties between that institution and fossil fuel industry, weapons manufacturing, and the genocidal Israeli regime. We are told there are no safe spaces until it's privileged students who demand them. When we chase the doublespeak, we find ourselves in a never-ending loop. We point out the contradictions between the university's stated ideals and its conduct. Stop arresting our students, stop evicting them, stop firing staff, stop interrogating our most vulnerable teachers, stop breaking your promises to students. We politely ask for an alignment between actions and values, and the alignment never comes. Meanwhile, we continue to lose power as faculty, as students, and as staff. The wheels of neoliberalism, as ever, march forward, as we, bereft, erect ever more altars to a fictional past of freedom. Or we could let go of the idea that the university exists as a suspended reality outside of capitalism, that it's one magic castle where reason and knowledge triumph in a society otherwise run by profit. We could instead recognize that the university is a structure of power and a site of political struggle. We can tune into its political economic levers. We can recognize ourselves as not actors outside of capitalism, but first and foremost as workers. We can recognize top-level university administrators not as benign stewards, but as bosses, driven by concrete material interests. At the University of Chicago, administrators immediately halted all research after Trump's illegal executive order freezing federal aid. They have told us that if ICE visits campus, they will be sent to the UCPD, a notorious institution. And the UCPD happily told us that they are a law enforcement agency and would comply with all law enforcement agencies. These people will not protect us. And they are still operating under the falsehood that cooperating will save them. It won't. Rather than beg at their doors, we can do what workers who want to protect themselves have always done. Build power, recognize leverage where it exists, and exercise it to improve our working conditions. As we often chant on the streets, who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. You may ask, why then bother with the university at all? Why organize here in the first place? I'll offer 3 reasons. First, the university is a place of congregation, which are increasingly rare in American society. There was a time when Americans were much more connected to each other through voluntary associations, churches, neighborhood organizations, libraries, trade unions, and even general non-commodified public spaces like parks. Many of these institutions have either been destroyed by neoliberalization and austerity, think, for example, of the attack on public libraries, or have fallen out of favor. Church attendance, for example, has declined precipitously. Universities remain one of the few institutions that tie together thousands of people, And they're increasingly important for the life course as more and more people seek university educations. Second, these are places where we invest enormous amounts of energy and time. They would not exist without us. They are ours. We deserve to have them serve us back. They are worth fighting for insofar as our time and energy is worth fighting for. Third, many universities function effectively as mini governance structures. The University of Chicago, and I apologize I keep giving this example, but that's where I live my life, is the largest employer in the city of Chicago. For tens of thousands of people in the city, it is also a healthcare provider, a landlord, and even a police force. And yet, who rules the University of Chicago? The institution is run by an unelected board of trustees, composed primarily of ultra-wealthy financiers. Who put them in charge? The university's main benefactor, trustee David Rubenstein, single-handedly saved a tax break loophole that has saved billionaires like him from paying millions in taxes, just to give you an idea. My point is that universities function as undemocratic governance structures who rule over tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives without any methods of accountability in place. As students, faculty, and staff, as the people without whom universities cannot exist, although I really think that administrators would love it if they could have a university without students or faculty. They're like, can we just have the hedge fund? That would be We are uniquely positioned to wage the political struggle within universities. I hope that I've convinced you that any hope of organizing within the university needs to start by treating it as a site of political struggle, and that while recognizing its imperfections, it's still a worthy place to struggle for and through. So then how do we wage this struggle? I want to answer this question by offering some general principles and applying them to the Palestine Solidarity Movement. I'm going to phrase them as contentions. This is a photo of your beautiful encampment. So beautiful. It was amazing to learn that you had the longest uninterrupted encampment in the wave. We had 9 days in it. Oh, those were a long 9 days of my life. I slept so hard after. The first contention is that movements need multiple flanks, and I would add to that a division of labor. We talked about this at lunch with a few of you. Successful social movements both in the US and abroad have often had multiple flanks: radical, progressive, and moderate. Radicals use disruption and direct action to impose costs and push the horizons of demands. They remind us always of the ideal world we are working towards, the broadest aspirations of the movement, even if those aspirations seem far off. With our outer radical wing, we risk confusing short-term progress for the sum of our liberatory demands. At the same time, the work of progress sometimes is incremental. Moderates work on securing a foot in the door for the cause and leverage institutional positions to make those incremental changes. Progressives often liaise and negotiate between the two groups. I want to just clarify for a second that I'm not actually arguing for an ideological distinction here. I'm arguing for a distinction in action. Many people who are positioned to play the role of a progressive or a moderate may have totally radical politics, but because of their structural position, right, in the movement, they should be playing the role of the moderate. Students, and I think I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I look forward to questions. Students have the strategic advantage to be the radical front of the movement. And I want to say that within student movements, there's also different flanks often, and that's totally okay too. But usually the radical flank is held by students. And that's because students are only on campus temporarily, generally. They don't have to manage decades-long relationships with colleagues and administrators. They often have fewer work and family obligations, although lots of work obligations I'm acknowledging, and therefore have more time and can take on higher risks. In the university's corporate model, they are the consumers and therefore hold power as a collective that administrators cannot simply eliminate. Since October, though, faculty and staff for Justice in Palestine chapters have popped up across university campuses. These chapters were often started to defend students from administrator and police attacks, but I'm happy to say that faculty and staff have also started organizing in their own right. thinking through what strategic advantages they can leverage, whether those are institutional knowledge, long-term relationships with administrators, or their very labor. While students and faculty should work in close coalition, in my view, campuses that have had separate organizations for student and faculty have been more successful. The multiple flank strategy recognizes that different actors have different roles to play depending on their strengths and vulnerabilities within the system. Sometimes students want to take more radical action than faculty can sign on to, at least openly. Having separate organizations allows us to come together when it makes sense and play the role of allies for each other when that makes sense. Not being directly implicated in every single action makes faculty less likely to attempt to curb students' radical impulses. Meanwhile, faculty can either reject or work through the system depending on the specific goal of a campaign. Faculty are often well positioned to function as the moderate and progressive wings of the movement. For example, I got the sense that this has happened here as well, our students secured some promises from the administration as a result of the encampment. None of those were met. And it's taken faculty, right? And the students didn't understand the structure of how the institution works. How do you even get to the administrator? Like, how do you even get the provost to talk to you, right? And this was where faculty could come in. You know, faculty have structures to access these things. And we had to learn a lot, actually, about the structure. Like, part of it was a rude awakening of being like, how does this work? What is this? But we've all been learning the system and pushing for those changes. Those wins were only possible through the radical action of creating an encampment, right? But bringing them home, actualizing them, often took sort of all this institutional knowledge and working, quote unquote, within the system that faculty were well positioned to do. Similarly, with disciplinary hearings, faculty could pore over processes. They had the institutional knowledge to know when a hearing was being run the way it's usually run versus when it was, suddenly and arbitrarily changed. We had law professors, poring over students' cases. We had faculty reading every student's sort of response to a disciplinary inquiry. We had faculty going with students to disciplinary hearings as support systems. I lost my train of thought, so I'm going to move on to the next one. Keep it moving. The second contention I'll make is that we need to elevate the material in our organizing. So much of the history of the Palestine Solidarity movement on US campuses was focused on the symbolic. Students working alone and lacking leverage did enormous amounts of political education using spectacle to draw attention to the cause. When I was a student at the University of Michigan, for example, in the late aughts and early 10s, we did a series of walkouts that successfully shut down a speaking tour by Israeli generals. Die-ins, sit-ins, and campus-wide votes for divestment and sanctions have been mainstays of Palestine work at universities. These have been and continue to be incredibly important for raising awareness. But campus divestment votes and symbolic actions did not usually change material conditions for Palestinians. Trustees and administrators could simply shrug and move on. To take our organizing to the next level, we need to make continuing support for genocide materially costly for universities. It should not be possible to maintain business as usual if you are investing in death. The good news is we've already begun doing this work. Last spring, we saw students inflict a material cost on the function of the university through the encampments. The camps were impossible to ignore, caused enormous headaches for administrators, and cost money and bad publicity. They helped connect university-based organizers to their broader cities and communities, strengthening the movement. They blended the material with the ideological in that they also gave us a glimpse of what life might be like if universities were truly for the people. They were a beautiful contrast to the securitized, commodified, and privatized version of knowledge production and transmission that usually reigns over campus. But the encampments alone could not be a long-term strategy because they were very costly to maintain in terms of time and energy. Lots of knowing nods. I feel you. Again, I don't know how you kept yours going for. How long was it? It was like 4 weeks? 4 weeks? Heroes. Actual heroes, thank you. In tandem with periodic actions like these, ideally student-led, we need deep organizing that maps the structures of the university, studies its power systems, builds our own power, and thinks through how to leverage it. We need to think in the long term. What would it look like to envision a general strike over divestment? What would it take to get there? As a former union organizer, I know that it takes years to build toward a successful strike. Sadly, it can't simply happen through a call on Instagram. No shade. What steps can, okay, a little shade. So kind of. What steps can we take along the way to a strike? Who are our allies? Where are we strongest? Where are we weakest? We need not reinvent the wheel. The labor movement has developed the tools and methods by which we can map the possibilities for organizing a large workplace. How can we adapt them to the university? At a place like the University of Oregon, you are so far ahead of the curve. I mean, it's incredible, really. You already have unionized workers across every segment of your institution, including undergrads. I had never even realized there were unionized undergrads anywhere, so that is just incredible. I imagine that institutions like UO will lead the way as workers across other universities attempt to similarly build power. At a place like this, the question becomes, how do we build unions that function not just as administrative, but as political units? We have to resurrect the legacy of the union as a hub of worker life and as a political home. We have to ask our colleagues to go from defense to offense. We will never compromise our way out of increasing austerity. Pretend neutrality and silence will not protect us. It did not protect us during the McCarthy era, and it won't protect us during the Trump era. My third and final contention is more like a reminder. In the Palestine solidarity movement, we often say, we're not liberating Palestine, Palestine is liberating us. Since the genocidal assault on Gaza began in fall of 2023, Palestine has exposed how little power we actually have in our institutions, how little public opinion in the U.S. matters for foreign policy, how willing our bosses are to discard us or send in the police to attack us. We have seen the folly of assuming we are safe in these spaces or that they will function according to their stated ideals. The lesson has been, to survive, we need power. To have power, we need to build it together. In this moment of horror, I actually have a lot of hope. I saw people organize over the last 16 months who had never organized before in their lives. At one meeting, a senior colleague who's been at my university for 2 decades turned to me and said, I didn't know it could be like this. By like this, she meant that we could come together, faculty and staff and students, to demand something different. Many of us know more of our colleagues now than we did over years at our workplaces. Colleagues across different professional levels and from different corners of the institution. People we may have otherwise never met. We have eaten together, plotted together, sang together, laughed together, sobbed together, faced the police together. Israel's brutality and the university's repression threw us into each other's arms, and we are not going to let go. At my own university, there is a recent effort to restart and empower our chapter of the American Association of University Presidents. Yes, it's so exciting. It's the closest thing we have to a union. Many of the people leading this charge had never organized before joining the newly created FSJP little over a year ago. Palestine has opened up the horizons of possibilities on U.S. campuses and in U.S. society in general. We are imagining and demanding more than just the boycott, divestment, and sanctions that Palestinians have asked of us. We are demanding a different type of workplace entirely, one that listens to us, protects us, serves us, aligns with our values. We are, in short, demanding the university. The path ahead is long, but I fully believe we have the people power to do it. With Trump and the far right at the gates, we truly have nothing to lose but our chains. Thank you. fine. As an academic, I don't have any encores. I just one talk. Sorry, awkward.
Why don't you stay here?
Okay. One more talk.
White cards, pens, pencils. If you could just go ahead and fill out any questions you have, come up here, hand them hold them up, yes. Sophia, Ellie, or Sophia's back here. One of us will grab them. If you've got questions, take a minute to do this. And the first one we'll get, let's see here. And we'll begin this. You can keep writing, even as she's developing a response to each of these. Okay, so. You want me to read these to you? You're going to be able to read these. Would you read that? That's the first question. The second one, so looks like it's also a lot of appreciation and so do you see right?
Yeah.
So there's two questions you can start playing with while we're going forward.
Okay, great.
All right, we've got a few questions.
Okay.
Until we run out of time. So Eman, go ahead.
Thank you for everyone collecting questions as well. That's I appreciate you. And the folks who passed out pens and papers, I appreciate your work. So the first question says, thank you for being here. You're welcome. My question is the following. A few days ago, we had two criminals talking about what to do with Gaza. We had a powerful enemy with something worldwide. Based on your experience, how do we make the pro-Palestine movement internationally powerful? I think this is a really good question, and I actually weirdly have a kind of and maybe counterintuitive answer, which is that we actually need to focus on the local. So just like there's a division of labor within our movements on campus and within our movements in the US, I think that we have to think about what is our role given our position in the international movement. And I think, I've seen a little bit of confusion about this over the last 16 months as people have rightfully been reading Palestinian scholars and Palestinian movement theorists in Palestine. And I love that that's happening. I think that kind of political education is really important. It's also important that someone living in the West Bank or someone living in Gaza has a different role to play, right? Well, our role is that we are in the heart of US empire, and we are in the country that most supports the assault on Palestinian life, without whom the expropriation of Palestinian land, the mass slaughter of Palestinians would not be possible without US support. So we have a special role to play here, and I think that the way to think about the sort of international dimension is to reclaim that we are part of an international legacy. So a lot of the movements in the 60s and 70s that a lot of us draw inspiration from they saw their work as part of a global liberationist struggle, as not necessarily that different from those fighting against colonialism in different places. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to have the same exact tasks, right? But I think seeing that is really important, because what we've seen, one of the failures, I think, of liberalism is that it maintains the exceptionalism of the US and the exceptionalism of US empire. As soon as Trump and Netanyahu made this announcement, the discourse I was seeing online was Harris voters saying, well, you deserve it because you stayed home, or you didn't vote for Harris, or you picked and they're saying this to Arabs and Muslims, which are you need to decide, are we important enough that you should have tried to win us in the campaign, or we can't both have been not important so that you didn't have to cater to us, and somehow we lost you the election. Like that doesn't make sense. But also, if every single Muslim, first of all, both the majority of Muslims and Arabs did vote for Harris. But even if every single one of them had voted for Harris, you still would have lost that election. And so it is a liberal impulse to maintain the but ultimately, and the most important part of this is you wouldn't talk to someone who you thought was a human being like that. You wouldn't say to them, you deserve your mass slaughter because I think you made a bad choice in an election. You deserve for your family to die en masse. That means that you don't believe in our humanity. And that's the problem with the sort of Western liberal framework, is that it retains the same structures of tiered humanity that have brought us to this moment, right? And so we have to reject that ideologically, even if our work is specific to what we're doing here in the US. I don't know if I answered that question, but there are a lot of questions. Okay, exciting. Okay, what's the next one? Because this one looks short. How can alumni productively assist in campus activism? I love this question. I think alumni have a huge role to play. First of all, they have a lot of institutional memory. Second of all, administrators are so scared of losing alumni. So withdrawing funds and having alumni write into administrators en masse, I think is really important. I think coordinating with the alumni at UChicago are currently helping us with a massive research effort where we're looking into UChicago's investments and who the hell this board of trustees is that rules our lives. So they have formed a joint research committee with FSJP. And then of course turnout to events and such. But I think they're a crucial part of the movement because the university structure sees alumni as an important donor base and as an important kind of group of people. And so, there's a lot that can be done, and I think it should be done in coalition with faculty and staff.
Oh, excellent. Get you some more here. You have a lot here.
Oh my gosh. I hope this is a good sign. As a minority in academics, how did you push past all the people who opposed you and your work to get to a place where people will listen to you? I find it hard to talk about any organizing I do with people like my advisor because I'm worried about repercussions for my career. First of all, I'm really sorry that's happening to you, whoever wrote that question. Your relationship with your advisor, it's such an important relationship, and it's sad and hard that you don't feel safe in that relationship, and I wish things were different, so I just wanted to take a moment to validate that. I think I'm always torn when I get questions like this because there's a version of me that wants to advise you for the world as I think it should be, and there's a version of me that feels compelled to advise you for the world as I think it is. So here's the two. The world should be such that you can be all of yourselves, right? And that you should be feeling totally safe with your advisor, and there should be no repercussions to your activism. So let me just validate that for a second. The world as it is such that academia is incredibly competitive, it's incredibly scarce, and there are sometimes repercussions. And I just want to say that we are not all well positioned to do all the things at the same time. I have two close mentors from grad school, and one of them I'm pretty sure is a Zionist. I never talked to her about it. I never brought up Palestine. I wore my Palestine stuff. To her credit, she didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. We have played this game for literally a decade and a half, okay? I think it's okay that as I was going through grad school, this is not the fight I picked with this person. I still did my organizing. I fought for BDS in my union. I went out to rallies. I was doing my work. But that was not the place to do that work. And it's okay to make those choices. You can be strategic about where you put your energy and your activism such that it benefits the movement and doesn't destroy your life. Because we need you. Like, we want you to get a job. We want you to publish. We want you to get a job. We want you to get to the other side. So we need more of you here, you know? And so I don't, like, try to fight that impulse that's like, I need to burn it down in every single room. And this is coming from me, someone who, but part of it is that I don't think that I would have had the platform that I have if I didn't play the game for a while, right? Like, if I didn't put my head down and do solid, rigorous, mainstream sociology in mainstream academic journals that I believed in. I wasn't saying anything I didn't believe in, right? But, like, if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have gotten the job. I wouldn't have gotten, like, so I think, you know, each of those is different, and if you do feel the need to burn it down, I'm also not saying it's your fault, right? But I think it's okay to be a little bit strategic and to think about the long term. Grad school is one chapter of your life. Like, I remember having this, and actually just the other day, one of my oldest friends said to me, you know, I remember when you were in grad school, because we were in New York together, and she said, and you would constantly fret about this, like, I'm not having a public impact. I've been swallowed up by the ivory tower, and oh my God, and like, I can't believe this is what my life has added up to. And thankfully I had wise friends who were like, yo, just finish your PhD first. Just like, do this thing, and then we'll see what happens. And it's true, right? And so, yeah, I encourage you to do that same thinking, and if you ever want to talk more about it in detail, just write to me. I'm more than happy to jump on a Zoom with you.
That's great. I'm trying to group a couple of these
Okay,
that are
great.
similar.
Thank you.
There are a lot of questions. They're great questions.
I'm going to read these both.
I'm judging those as somewhat similar.
Cool. University spaces and campus activism are often disconnected from working class life, true, leading some on the left to urge avoiding an overemphasis on the university. How do you think we can overcome this disconnect? What's something the labor movement can teach the Palestine movement, and what can the Palestine movement, teach the labor movement? So I actually think, if you look at the data, our image, it's kind of funny because I'm at UChicago, so I'm kind of like representing the opposite of what I'm about to tell you, but when we think of the university, we often think of places like UChicago or UVO, that's like an R1, but actually most people's university experience is of places that are not elite institutions, are not R1s. Universities are a big part of many working class people's lives. And increasingly so. And I think that I want us, and I think it's significant that the graduate student labor movement, has been the fastest growing sector of the labor movement over the last decade. So I think we need to. I think this model of separation between like working class and college going is not true of the entire country, and needs to be questioned, because the reality is that like it's no longer the biggest let me put my sociology hat. The biggest predictor, right, of people's like long-term wealth outcome is actually whether they inherited wealth, regardless of college degree. It's true that college degrees will improve your like lifelong earnings, but the idea that like the differences between college and not college is actually not necessarily sociologically accurate. So I think we need to kind of reorient that and think about how to make universities and how to center universities that are not elite. And so there's a lot of work to do on that front. But at the end of the day, we have to organize. We as people in this room are probably connected to the university. And so we also have to organize in the spaces that are available to us. And we can say, like, this doesn't represent everyone. This is not everything. It doesn't have to be the leadership role, but it is still important to organize in these spaces. I think the worst thing we can do is be in the institution and then pretend like we're not, and then use that as an excuse not to organize. The labor movement, I think power mapping, organizing, like these are the things the labor movement can teach the Palestine movement, and then I think the Palestine movement can help. It is really good at pulling in a lot of different sectors and conveying urgency, and I think that conveying the Palestine movement is so deeply and thoroughly political. There's no version of it that can be depoliticized the way that some people want the labor movement to be. And I think that's the sort of benefit in that direction. Wow, I feel like such a beast right now. I'm doing it, guys. Cool. In critiquing the neoliberal, university scholars frequently fall into this historical amnesia. Can you speak to the degree of which the American university has been gilded and not golden? Okay, and as a grad student in political science, one of the social science departments who shamefully are not sponsoring this event, what advice do you have to confront the neutrality among our colleagues and faculty? How do you think the Palestine solidarity movement has changed in your lifetime? Oh, I love that question. How must we adapt to those changes? Okay, I'm going to start with the neoliberal university and the nostalgia question. We have a tendency to define history in terms of how the best faring people in that history have been faring. And if we think about the eras that are seen as the golden eras of the university, and then think about the university's relationship with Black folks or poor folks or immigrants, it becomes very clear that it was not this like magical place. I highly recommend, if anyone has read Palo Alto by Malcolm Harris. Has anyone read this book? It's a history of Palo Alto, but really also a history of Stanford. And like, oh man, woo! And Stanford is a pretty recent place, right? And it wasn't built in the South. It wasn't like, but that, just the kind of sheer evil at the heart of an institution. I mean, again, I work at UChicago, so so I think that, I think it's just simply not the case that these institutions have ever been innocent. And again, if we reject a model of the world that centers the white cis man as like the modal experience of any given era, then that imperfection is very clear. We don't have to dig very deep to see that imperfection in universities. Neutrality. Okay, so I come from the place that is branded neutrality, right? Many universities have taken up the so-called Chicago principles, especially since the protests. And actually, two of my colleagues, one of whom runs this Forum for Free Inquiry, they just wrote an op-ed in the New York Times saying business leaders need to learn from what university leaders have learned, which is just shut up, just don't say anything, be neutral. And the actual line that intelligent people at the University of Chicago will say openly to other intelligent people is, get ready, divestment is political, investment is neutral. Make it make sense. I mean, my God, is that why I fill out a conflict of interest every year for the university to talk about like, so when I say my money is invested in such and such that's tied to my research and I have to disclose it to the university, isn't that literally because investment is not neutral? I mean, this is what I mean about the doublespeak, right? This is what I mean about the doublespeak. These institutions are so good at making up a blatant lie and getting us to chase it. I mean, we're watching Trump do this with DEI. He doesn't mean DEI. He means racial integration. That's what he's saying. He's saying racial integration is bad. And he's saying it's DEI. And all these like mainstream journalists are like, DEI? No, call it what it is, right? There is no such thing as neutrality. It doesn't exist. I don't care what you say. That op-ed is an obfuscation. We are not protesting the university because we wish the president had said something. I don't care what he says. What I care about is that I, as a Palestinian, have spent 12 hours a day in my office toiling for an institution that is actively killing my people live. And I will never forgive that. And if you look me in the eye and you tell me that that's neutrality, not only are you a murderer, you are also gaslighting me. And it's unforgivable. So call it what it is. It is not neutral. nostalgia, neoliberalism. Wow, we're doing it all. How do you think the Palestine solidarity movement has changed? I talked about this a little bit at lunch with some of you. Y'all, I just want to emphasize, I'm not that old. I'm 35, okay? I know my students are like, okay, ma'am. I do send gifts, and that is embarrassing for me. But even in my lifetime, right, if you had told me one day 80% of Democrats would think we should cut aid to Israel, I would be like, what? No way, right? I had, like, when I was in middle school, every school presentation I did was about Palestine, and I would literally, like, pull down a map and be like, okay, guys, Palestine is a place, it is where I am from, let me tell you about it, and no one had heard of it, right? We have come such a long way. The world has changed. We changed it. All of you in this room, we changed the world. Like, it is incredible. The changes have been so incredible, right? That I walk into now like a nice, chic, like, I was at a fancy restaurant in Chicago the other day, and my waiter, between doing all the like weird things they do at fancy restaurants, was like, I love your necklace, free Palestine. What? Unbelievable. Never would have happened even 5 years ago. So we changed public opinion, but what we've also learned is public opinion isn't enough, because we don't live in the kind of democracy where public opinion translates into policy change. So that's our next step, right? And that's why we're focused on power. That's why we're focused on leverage. That's why we're focused on material change. Yeah. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for filtering. I'm doing great. This is like I feel like I'm on a game show. It's like, how do you keep hope? Wow, that's a good one. The organizer, abolitionist Mariam Kaba, has said that hope is a discipline, and I've really taken that up. Hope is not just something that we like have or we don't have. It's something we work at and we cultivate in ourselves. And those moments when you're losing hope as an organizer and as a human are moments to kind of turn inward a little, give yourself a little love, and find places that energize you. One day I felt really hopeless around Christmas time, I think in 2023, and what is time? 2023, yeah. And I went and sang carols for Palestine, where they had changed the words to a bunch of Christmas carols to make them like Palestine related. And I'm not Christian, I don't know the carols, and I can't sing. But it felt hopeful and joyful, you know? So I think, hope is a discipline. Like, as humans, we are particularly bad at figuring out how the world works. We're really bad at predicting the future. Every tyrant has fallen. Every system has fallen. Every single one. And we don't know, when this one will fall or how, but it will, we know that. And I think for me, and this is where I draw on my Muslim faith, for me, what keeps me going is recognizing that for me, I believe that God has put me on this earth to do something and has given me a set of resources, and that my job is not the outcomes. My job is to wake up every day, use those resources at my disposal to fight for justice. And if at the end of the day I feel that I've done that, then it's okay. The outcomes are not for me to control. I know a lot. I've been writing this article about how so many people got so much more religious after the genocide started. I definitely have found a lot of solace in that. So that's how I keep hope. Of course, we are not liberating Palestine. Palestine is liberating us. But how do we ensure campus actions actually align with Palestinians and doesn't get lost in campus and U.S. politics? Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think we constantly need to check in with the movement. I think these spaces, especially in movements have ebb and flow moments, right? And when the ebb happens is the moment to sort of like take stock, look around, check in with each other and ourselves, check in with our goals, and check in with the folks that we're fighting for and with. And so it's not always going to be perfect. We have to give ourselves and each other a lot of grace. But I think that I think that that's a sort of iterative process and a work of like keeping that conversation going. It's not about like, there's not one solution. It's more that has to be an active commitment that we're constantly doing those check-ins. The other thing I would say about that is that, and I said this earlier today, so I'm sorry for repeating myself, but even if we liberated Palestine tomorrow, we would still have a lot of work to do for liberation. So it's okay for Palestine to be part of a broader project for liberation. I actually I think that we should not be siloed, right? It's like we should have the check-ins and all that, but also there's a broader movement going on, and that's where we're strongest. Yeah.
A group of similarly.
Do I get a little sticker at the end of this? Or?
I think so. You get Cheekies, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I actually love mementos. I got a duck whistle. I'm unreasonably excited about it. Thank you so much. What advice would you give for navigating conflict within organizing spaces, e.g. racism and sexism? How would you recommend going about incorporating other genocides into the Palestine movement without taking away from it, or do you not think they should be combined? Thank you for being here. Happy Black History Month. Thank you. Happy Black History Month to all of you. So navigating conflict, again, repeating myself a little bit, I think that we need to draw a clear, I told this story, I'm sorry for my repetition for the few people who were at lunch, but there's this amazing letter that I always reference between the Black Panthers and the Women's Liberation Front, in which they say, and there was some dispute or conflict that had happened, and the writer, who I think was Stokely Carmichael, says, the Women's Liberation Front is are our friends, and friends can make mistakes. The enemy cannot make mistakes because the enemy's existence is a mistake. And I always think about that letter, and I always bring it up in organizing spaces, because we have to have a clear distinction between friends who make mistakes and enemies. And we often mistake the two, in part because we don't have access to our enemies, right? Like, you don't get to yell at Biden. You don't get to yell at Trump. You don't get to yell at Netanyahu, but you can yell at your comrade who actually cares what you think, unlike those people, right? And so often we feel so impotent and so enraged that we are lashing out at the people that we can actually hurt, and those are our comrades and the people in our movement. And sometimes it comes from a place of thinking that we have the right answers. Listen, I'm a Marxist, I'm a materialist, I know factionalism, I know exactly which section of Capital Volume 2 that I think defines me as a Marxist. But at the end of the day, right, we don't know what's gonna work. We don't. We're in unprecedented conditions, and we've never really won in our lifetime. The times that we've won are so rare as a left. And so you may have your beliefs, and you should argue for them by all means. But at the end of the day, you don't know what's going to work. And so don't treat these differences as the lines in the sand within the movement. I really believe that we need to have a lot more grace for each other, but also just a lot more humility about our political positions, right? Who knows what's going to make an encampment successful? We all were trying it at the same time, right? And of course, we had a lot of different opinions about it, but at the end of the day, what defeated our what ended our encampments was not each other. It was not the people who escalated, or the people who didn't, or the people who talked to the police, or the people who didn't. What ended it was the administrators and the cops and the broader system that doesn't see Palestinians as human beings. That's who defeated us, not each other. So that's really important, I think, we have to be able to zoom out a little bit. And, talk to movement elders, because I think it's funny to describe myself as any kind of elder at 35. I'm like, as a movement elder. But, it's like I've seen, there's something comforting about having gone through these cycles and being like, oh yeah, no, it's not the end of the world. Like, yeah, you're all really mad at each other right now, and like the next wave of protests, you're gonna be comrades again. It's okay. I think that's one of the roles that like older folks can kind of play, is to give a little bit of that perspective. But yeah, managing these conflicts. I think also a lot of creating room for joy and community with each other that like help remind each other that we're on the same side, we're not enemies, we're not, so when there is conflict, spending a lot of time on repair and intentional community building, I think is very, very effective. And being able to say, hey, I'm sorry, I messed up. Or like, I don't know whether I did the right thing or not. So we need to be more vulnerable with each other in movements, I think. Yeah. Now I feel like a therapist. Oh no, thanks, sorry. How would you recommend going? No. Other genocides. Yes, I think this is so important. I think that we need to, of course, we need to talk about the Congo, we need to talk about Sudan. And in fact, I do think, one of my friends who organizes around the Congo in particular, and he says, well, part of the reason people are talking about the Congo is because the Palestine movement has made us talk about genocide, and so we're talking more about the Congo as a result of the Palestine movement. Yes, of course they should be combined, because ultimately what is killing people in the Congo and what's killing people in Sudan and what's killing people in Palestine is racial capitalism. And there's a settler colonial form, and there's a neo-colonial form where you have countries fighting over a second land grab over Africa, where they're trying to take gold out of the Sudan and take cobalt out of the DRC, right? This attempt by stronger countries to extract resources and treat whatever population stands in the way as disposable, those are the same logics. So absolutely they should be talked about in the same breath. I think that it's harder to organize around, when I've had events with Sudanese folks, the ask has been mutual aid, right? Because people don't want US intervention, and the US is not the main player in Sudan. It is much more so in the Congo, but in a less direct way than giving $20 billion a year. So I think we need to also, have a lot of nuance around, have a lot of zoomed out perspective as to how these things are interrelated in the broader systems that we're fighting, and kind of try to really get at okay, so what is the ask from our movements? Is our ask awareness? Is our ask a particular demand, etc.? And I think we need to spend time developing that for the DRC and for the Sudan. Okay, I think I did those.
So I'm going to just because we're running out of time, you got, I think, all, I'm keeping them.
Okay.
This one's a group that really get into the kind of the structure of movement building.
Yeah.
In terms of the flanks. And so maybe if you can just kind of skim through a couple of those and then make a general response, give me enough time so we can get to all the questions, hopefully, before we're 10 more minutes out. So.
Yeah, so distrust and strategy differences. So how do we treat each other better across the flanks? There needs to be a lot of, I think that one of the things we talked about today at lunch was there's no perfect kind of calibration between this is the perfect percent of radical, perfect percent of progressive, moderate. I think it needs to be campaign by campaign and goal by goal, right? So if we as a movement can come together and say, what are our long-term goals? What are our shorter-term goals? What are our strategies? What are our tactics, right? If we say okay, in the long term, for example, in the long term, we want divestment. In the short term, we can't get to divestment unless we break the hold of the Board of Trustees on this like campus. In order to do that, we need to raise an awareness, like we need to raise a level of awareness about the role that the trustees play and who they are, right? Then it's like, okay, so in the shorter term, okay, we need a campaign about who the trustees are and who they are, right? For example, as like a kind of this week, this month, this year, this decade. If we have that kind of conversation, the roles, I think, become easier to delineate, right? I think right now these roles happen kind of spontaneously, right? Like there isn't a lot of that conversation. So for example, at UChicago, we've been having meetings between students and faculty every 2 weeks to like draw out this long-term strategy to be like, and it's not that we're all gonna do the same thing, right? So like the students can have the students can come protest outside of a meeting of the Board of Trustees in ways that like some faculty can't quite be seen there, right? Or like whatever. But once we figure out what the goals are and the strategies are, it becomes easier to figure out that division of labor. And I think it needs to really be like, we need to think through what are the consequences of these strategies for these different people, right? Like what would it be like to have the conversation, like play it out? You know, just as an example, one student said, well, what if this person, and he named a famous tenured professor at our university who is very much an ally and very, like, she's an FSJP, and he was like, I just don't get why y'all aren't making any sacrifices. Like, what if she changed herself to the, like, you know, the door of the president's office? And I was like, okay, let's play out the scenario. She changed herself to the door of the president's office. Then what? How long can she sit there in the cold before she needs to like sleep, go to the bathroom, whatever? All they need to do is wait her out, right? She's 67. They just need to wait her out. And they will. And after that, she's never ever going to be invited to a meeting with a dean again, right? She's the person who told us like what the deans were thinking about X, Y, and Z, right? She's never ever going to be in those rooms where she could kind of come back and give us information. And she's one of very few senior people who are on our side. So like, let's play it out, right? Because it's easy to say, well, she's just not willing to make sacrifices. And it's like, is that true? And maybe it is. Like maybe in a different action, yes, she should be changing her. We should all be doing that. Maybe. But the point is, it's only through that conversation that we can figure out what the strategic thing to do is. It has to be, to me, it has to be oriented around what do we want to achieve? What do we want to do for Palestine or for whatever our cause is, right? Because it's not just about staking an ideological position, right? We are now a powerful movement that can win things. What do we want to achieve? What is the possible way that we can achieve it? So unless we have those conversations, it's not going to be clear, you know? Okay.
That I thought was going to be in a different group, but I'm going to let you add it to this.
Is it strategic to look into running a student government campaign to leverage institutional power to aid our current movements, labor, Palestine, immigration rights? So I think it depends. Does your student government have power? So genuinely, I'm not even trying to be shady, truly. There are places where student governments have, for example, a person on the board of trustees, or they have a vote on something or another, right? If you have that, then yeah, for sure, go for it. If you don't, then it becomes a question of like, so like I said, for a long time, for a decade, these student government votes, the divestment votes, were a core bread and butter of the Palestine movement. They happened at my university, and we often won them. Like, we often would win, like, student government. That happened at UChicago, happened in Michigan. We would win these divestment votes. Our grad student union at NYU voted for divestment, but it had no material power. That doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It could be a very good list building exercise. It could be a really good way to figure out like who's on your side, who's not, who's willing to sign a petition, who's not, right? It could be a very good way to map out campus. And if that's the case, then I think it's a good idea. But if it's the end in itself, I would say that it's not going to actually change material conditions necessarily. But it can be a very good exercise in political education and an exercise in list building. Like a lot of letters, right? People are like, the letters don't do anything. And I'm like, oh yes, they do. The letters mean that you could look up anybody's name and figure out if they are pro-Palestine or not. Like, you actually know where your strengths are. You know that like 15 political scientists signed on and only 2 economists. Like, you know which places you have support or not. As an organizer, those archives are crucial, actually. So it could be that. Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to get through all these, but we got a couple more here. We're going to try to let Eman answer, and then...
If your question keeps you up at night, you should email it to me. And then I can answer it during my insomnia bouts. In your lifetime, have there been any specific actions, protests, or events from organizing that stood out the most and motivated you to keep going? What was the story and how does it inspire you today? I will say that walking through the University of Chicago campus and hearing at the encampment songs that I grew up listening to, Arabic songs about Palestine, and looking up and seeing the Palestinian flag, like, was a life-changing experience. And I will never, ever forget that happened. If you haven't picked up on this, I'm a workaholic of sorts. Despite being a communist, I'm really, it's really so embarrassing how productivity oriented I am, but for good. But, you know, I work in my office. I spend so much of my life in that place, toiling away, meeting with students, writing. And as someone who grew up poor and brown and Muslim and a woman and queer, all the things, I figured out how to compartmentalize my life, right? And to like figure out how to be in these elite institutions and like turn off all the things so that I can function and survive. And I just never imagined that those would come together. That like part of my life that I managed so carefully would like be brought in, right, to these spaces that I don't necessarily feel seen in by students. And that was just incredible. And I know you gave that moment to someone through your work. I just want you all to know that like you did that for someone. And so, yeah, I felt really inspired by that. Also running away from the cops over the Brooklyn Bridge. The next day, and we were at a protest protesting Eric Garner's murder by the police, and the police were trying to kettle us, and I was like, okay, everybody good, you good, because I really have to take my comprehensive exams tomorrow with all the people that came to the protest with me, and then everybody's like, we're fine, go, and then I ran like I had never run before, and that was the day I figured out I knew how to run. If you need to enough, your body will run. Despite no experience of doing so. And other people were like jumping out of the way left and right. It was amazing. So that was also a highlight.
This is the last one.
Okay.
We'll go there, and then you can keep the rest and see if others come by.
Oh, any reflections, thoughts on the rally earlier today? You guys are amazing. Wow, I loved the rally. So many of you are excellent speakers. Is Paris here? Are they here? Well, Paris was incredible. Their speech was amazing. I thought it was an incredibly clever event. Like usually it's the same like 10 people giving, like rotated between speeches, and it was very clear that you really were able to draw your colleagues in to participate meaningfully in the action, and that was really incredible. And stick it out through the cold. And I just loved that you all were so sharp and so politically clear about the connections between the assault on Black history, the assault on trans people, the assault on immigrants, the assault on labor rights, and Palestine. Like, that was all so clear for you. So really, like, just amazing work. I felt so happy to be there. I listened to every single word. And I hope I'm at your next rally. My prize. And of course, I have to end the way Palestinians always end, which is next year in Jerusalem.
Excellent. Thank you so much.